everyone, and welcome to Wellness Unscripted. I'm Kara Merrick, a functional medicine nurse and the founder of Unscripted Clinic. So before we dive in today, I'd like to take a sec to thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love your support. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who could benefit from a little extra wellness in their life. Your support helps us continue bringing you authentic wellness insights and amazing guests week after week. My guest today is Dr. Alan Wood. He's a clinical psychologist who's pioneering a holistic approach to mental health. Dr. Wood combines traditional therapeutic methods with an appreciation of how our physical bodies and health affect our psychological well-being. In his practice, the Center for Deliberate Psychology, he emphasizes creating harmony between the mind, body, and emotions, something that's often overlooked in conventional therapy. We're going to explore today how psychology is evolving to incorporate broader, more holistic perspectives, what it means for the future of health treatment, and things you can do to support your own mental health. So let's jump in. Well, Alan, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited that we get to talk about this, nerd out about it for a bit. So
Yeah. I know in our first conversation, we had a lot of good things to say to each other. And these are two fields that don't typically come together for conversations like this. So I'm really excited to explore it a little bit.
Yeah, I am as well.
So, okay, let's jump in. So when thinking about like mainstream psychology, they've really focused on treating the mind and mental health issues in isolation from the rest of the body. They're in two completely different schools. They don't have a whole lot of overlap. If you're working with a psychologist and you're working with like a PCP, they don't talk to each other. But this paradigm is starting to change a little bit. And I know as a functional medicine nurse myself, I focus on how supporting epigenetics, so things that are impacted by nutrient status, lifestyle, biochemical, hormonal balance, how those things impact mental health. And these are things that aren't typically acknowledged in your, standard psychologist's office, but I know it is in yours. So I was hoping you could start by sharing a little bit of how you think about merging the traditional psychology with some more integrative approaches.
Yeah. And there's just so much to that question. And I really, really love it because there's so much to it. And as I've been studying more and as I've just been learning more, and even the field of psychology has been advancing, the separation between the mind and the body has becoming less and less. Now, there's always going to be philosophical and spiritual debates about where that separation is, and that is way above my pay grade. But one of the things that really got me started on this journey was actually a book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And Dr. van der Kolk is a trauma researcher in particular and has done numerous studies and spent his whole career investigating not just sort of emotional patterns or relationships or symptoms, but getting into, and this is my phrase for it, sort of the emotional muscle memory that we build up, where there are so many things we do that we take for granted, like how we tie our shoes, how we pick up our keys, how we put on our clothes, like all of these things are there. And we have emotional equivalents of those, where we have these emotional patterns and habits that we take for granted. And that those are intimately intertwined with just our bodies, how our muscles work, how our nerves have been developed to where they are to be able to help us get through a day. And so with that, and once we hit the pandemic, and I had so many clients being sent my way who they weren't able to go about their day normally, they weren't able to deal with things, or they were getting physicians saying, hey, it's all in your head. And that divide that you were saying of therapists and doctors not tending to talk to each other, that I sort of really had to come to terms with the question of like, what does it actually mean to help someone get better? What does it really mean to say I'm supporting someone's mental health when I know that this connection exists? I know that there is something that's going on in the body, but talking about things and helping someone's body feel better seem, and I've been trained to think that they're so different.
Mhm.
So I just started going down a rabbit hole of all of the different aspects that we know, particularly there's a whole field of interpersonal neurobiology. So how our nerves and our brains, and particularly our fight flight system, responds to relationships. And there are so many amazing connections between that nervous system, our immune system, our relationships, our digestion, our hormone balances, like all of these things, again, get so complicated and so rich the deeper you get into them. And so the more I've been hearing clients saying, I don't know what's going on, or I've been to X number of providers and haven't gotten an answer, the more I've had to wrestle with the fact that A, we don't have a lot of answers, but that we have a lot of interesting things that we can work with and we can explore with people just to see, okay, you're feeling depressed. Well, what's the emotional component of that? What's the physical component of that? How do those play together? And how do we move forward with that in a way that really supports the client and feeling like I am getting better?
Mhm. Yeah, you had lots of interesting points there, but one of them was that as a shared experience here, you didn't learn this in school. This was not taught in school. I didn't learn this in nursing school. They didn't talk anything about nutrition, lifestyle, neuro, barely anything about neurotransmitters, about how your physical body impacts your brain, because your brain is an organ. It
Right?
responds to all the same factors as the rest of your body does, but for some reason there's just a disconnect there. Um, and hopefully someday this will be taught in schools for practitioners, so that they can come together in a more holistic way, because treating mental health issues or treating physiologic issues, they're not siloed like we're led to believe that they are. And it's just so important to understand how these things are interacting, and that starts with asking why. So it's why are these patterns there? Why is my body or my fight or flight response reacting this way to this stimulus? I've got an input of a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, but my reaction is a 9.
Right.
And why
Yeah.
is that happening? So really digging in and taking the time to slow down, which is not something we're used to.
Right.
We're a TikTok generation where, you've got 3 seconds to catch my attention or I'm moving on.
Mm,
And these questions and fixing these types of problems it's not a quick fix. And so it takes more effort than we're used to putting into things like this. But it really is how you're going to get better, is by slowing down and asking why and why
yeah.
and why.
Yeah. And I even just love the emphasis and even slowing down into the slowing down right now, where the pressures that we feel, the way that we are sort of socialized to not need to use a bunch of attention, even the things that are taught in school, but we aren't given enough time to sort of absorb and know, okay, here's the theory. How do we apply that? Like,
Hmm.
there are so many things where there's this almost illusion of time or illusion of choice or illusion of opportunity. But then when we get into it, it's not as complete.
Hmm.
And so that slowing down that you're talking about, like my clients make fun of me for it all the time, where I use the phrase of, can we just pause there for a moment?
Yeah.
Where when we really take that time to lean in on something and we really take the time to get into it, then the why becomes accessible.
Hmm.
Even the what of what's going on, what are you experiencing, what's here, the how do we navigate this? How do we put things into play? And then not even in the active sense, but the just the is, because being and doing also gets so separated when it comes to physical and mental health,
Hmm.
where being healthy, being well, being anxious, being depressed, that, and this is another whole can of worms that we can absolutely get into, is when these things are sort of, we can look at it as, oh, here's a set of symptoms. This is what I'm experiencing. Here's what's there versus here's who I am. I am a depressed person. I am an anxious person. I am someone who has a chronic illness. And that's even where that connection between the body and the brain gets even deeper,
Mm-hmm.
where if we don't slow that down and really take a look at what does it mean for someone, not just in terms of the practical things that they have to do in their day to day to manage whatever symptoms are there,
Mm-hmm.
but then how that impacts how they see themselves, how they feel they're able to interact with other people in the world, it becomes so easy for things to become discordant or disharmonious and just get into the confusion and the mess that
Mm-hmm.
and we feel like we have to rush through because there's too much.
Yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle.
Very much so.
Yeah. One thing I found that helps a lot of my clients that I've been working with lately is just like physically slowing down. So this is something I have to remind myself of a lot of times too, because I'm a mom entrepreneur. I run a business, do the podcast, have a 4-year-old daughter. So there's all my to-do list is forever a mile long. So I'm doing the dishes really fast and I'm running over here to clean up. And then I'm just never slowing down. And even just in this conversation, I've noticed myself, your energy is helping me slow down, even talking right now. And it's like, this feels a lot better. And then, I mean, that's one of the ways, a very simple way that you can help start to break that chain.
Yeah,
um, yeah. So it's just an awareness of little things like that that can help you get out of that vicious cycle because it is going to keep going until you do something different.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So you talk about creating harmony between different parts of a person's identity and experience. Can you talk into that a little bit more? How did you come to this understanding, and how does it uh, guide your work with your clients?
Yeah. 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 The again, another very rich question. I think probably the easiest inroad to that is um, you mentioned earlier that I work with internal family systems as one of the therapy modalities that I do. And that was really the place where that sense of harmony became most clear for me in terms of both professionally and personally,
Mm,
is being able to not just slow down, but appreciate sort of the multiplicity, the so many different facets that we have going on. And when I have a client coming in, the number of times I hear someone saying, "Oh, I really want to do this thing, but I'm really not sure about it." Or "I'm really scared about this, but it seems like a really great thing."
mhm,
Or "I'm in this relationship and I really love this person and I can't stand them." That those sorts of dichotomies, those sorts of both ands where very different experiences are happening is such a normal process.
mhm,
And that's even one of the things that I've been appreciating more is that sort of more traditional or more strict psychology models tend to move towards oh, here's the right answer. Here's what we're supposed to feel. Here's what well-being is. And so as I've gotten more into internal family systems, which is embracing all of those different parts, looking at what they're trying to help with, sort of assuming positive intent for all of these different things, even if the impact isn't as positive as the part wants it to be, being able to still appreciate that that's there for a reason. Getting back to that why.
mhm,
So even for myself, like I talk about being a nerd quite a bit. I love all things nerdy, whether that's games or movies or doing a bunch of reading about interpersonal neurobiology, where that's something that I have a lot of parts that push me to be a nerd.
mhm,
And as I've done my own work and really delved into that, I've noticed that the parts that want to be sort of more mainstream and the parts that want to be a nerd don't get along well.
mhm,
And taking the time to slow down and see, well, what do my nerdy parts want from me? What do my mainstream parts want from me? That, again, slowing down is going to be a theme, I think,
yeah,
where
yeah,
the more time we really take to look at that and see how did we get to this place,
mhm,
the easier it is for things that feel like opposites to actually be seen as something that aren't incompatible.
mm,
And that you can be in a relationship with someone that you love and can't stand, and that you can hold space for both of those in a way that isn't dismissing or saying you shouldn't feel a particular way, but that you get to get in there and sort of achieve or accomplish the best of both of those in order to make sure that you're not having that discord in your system. I feel like that's kind of a general hand wavy answer. Like, how's that landing?
Yeah, it's interesting. And kind of how I'm interpreting this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of understanding what's a first order desire and what's a second order desire. So, first order being, I want this, and I want it more than I don't want it. And then the second order being, I want it, but the work to get there outweighs my desire for it. And maybe understanding the relationship between those two things, and maybe even just categorizing those two things. Is there any resonance there with what you were saying, or is that off left field?
Oh, that's very much in keeping with it. And I think the thing that I'll sort of highlight or amplify there is just the distance between the wanting and the doing.
Hmm.
First order desires, they're right there. We can go for them. They're generally fewer obstacles
Hmm.
between us and being able to pursue them. Not always, but generally.
Hmm.
Whereas second, or maybe third, fourth, or fifth, it gets to be so much more difficult, even if those things are really important, or we have a deeper sense of this could make a big difference.
Hmm.
And so being able to take all of those different levels of desire and get them all in the same room,
Hmm.
sort of reduce the hierarchy so that we can take a look at what's really going to be impactful or really resonant for client and then start moving some of those barriers away if they decide, oh, the thing that's going to be best is this fourth tier desire.
Hmm.
It may not be the easiest, but then how do we make that accessible?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with breaking habits too, which is really hard. I mean, our brains love habits, like you were alluding to earlier, tying your shoe, grabbing the keys before you walk out the door. Our brain likes those for a reason, because if all of those things needed a conscious decision, we'd be exhausted before we even got out of bed. So,
Right.
and we tend to habitualize as everything, whether that's emotional responses, whether that's the simple tasks that you're doing in your day, whether it's, grabbing the same foods off the shelf or stopping at the same store. It just, your brain likes those well-trodden paths. And some of them are helpful and some of them aren't so helpful, and everything in between. So
Right.
I think a lot of the work that we do separately, like in different realms, but is a common theme, is helping people understand what they're doing, because you can have these habits so down so well that you don't even know you're doing them. So it's bringing those to light and then helping to shape those so that the habits aren't detrimental to you and actually become a superpower and a strength.
Yeah. Yeah. And once we get to that point where there's the habit that is that superpower, there's harmony with the other parts of your system and the other habits,
Mhm.
that's where I end up seeing clients feeling most free, having the most choice in their lives, having the best connections, both internally and externally. And that's where I also hear clients reporting their best sense of being healthy. Like they're having the fewest gut issues, they're having the fewest headaches, they're having the
Mhm.
fewest, like, even there was a study I was reading the other day, and forgive me because I don't remember the exact source, but even this correlation between our immune system's ability to fight infection and our sort of sense of overall confidence, well-being, like personal integrity in terms of everything is in line. That
Mhm.
the better we feel, the more whole we feel emotionally, the more bandwidth there is for the body to deal with biological agents that are trying to get in.
Yeah, yeah. A good example of that kind of mind body connection is the butterflies in your stomach feeling when
Yeah,
you're about to get on stage, or you've got something that makes you really nervous you're about to do, and all of that stress is psychological, except that your stomach also feels it. So
yeah,
it's good to remember that that is not it's a very common, it's not an isolated thing. That's happening on a smaller scale at every moment of your day. There's bi-directional communications going between your body and your mind. And there's 8 times as many communications going from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut.
Yes.
And your gut is really, it's where 90% of your serotonin is made. So it's really important that we understand how these factors are playing into each other in, I mean, mental health issues like anxiety, depression, you name it, or even the smaller scale ones like mood instability or, getting off balance really easily. Um, and there is diet and lifestyle profoundly impact your brain function because like I said before, your brain is an organ. It relies on this complex interplay of the nutrients, neurotransmitters, hormones. It needs all of those things in balance to operate effectively. And one of the biggest factors we have on that is what we eat. It influences everything from cognition to memory to mood and emotional stability. So I, I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here. I know you know all of these things too. And it's so great that you're able to acknowledge these things. Do you want to expand on that at all? How do you see kind of the relationship of the mind body evolving in psychological practices?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even again, just amplifying what you were saying about the 80, like 8 times as much coming up from the body to the brain. Like specifically there, I think you're talking about the vagus nerve
Mm-hmm.
and how we do have this nerve that runs from the back of the jaw down the spine and then wraps around all of our organs. And so earlier when we were talking about fight and flight, it's that nerve that regulates that. And so if we're in a place of fight or flight, that's having a distinct impact on how our organs are functioning. It's like if we're in sympathetic activation, our stomach is clamping down
Yeah.
and we're holding things in and we're getting all of this muscle tension. And when that becomes a habit, then our body gets used to that. It redefines it as normal. And then maybe 6 months, a year, 10 years down the road, a client comes into my office and says, I always feel tense, or I always feel off, or I have these things that don't feel right, or I'm anxious. What do I do? And the fact that the fight or flight response in and of itself is literally a fight for survival. It's how our body has been programmed to regulate things. Like anxiety is a normal and appropriate response if you're in a life or death situation. Like,
Yeah.
we got to get up, we got to mobilize, we got to do things. Or similarly for depression, where if things are too much, if there's too much going on, depression can be the body's way of trying to slow things down,
Mm-hmm.
trying to re-regulate and to like pull back from overstimulation. Now, that's not 100% of it, but that earlier when we were talking about that why, it's that the body has these ways of trying to navigate things, just like a fever, like anxiety, depression, all of these things can be the body's way of saying, I need to do what I can with what's there.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to help clients even get into their body, being able to feel into how does your breath feel right now? If you put your hand on your stomach, how does that feel? Or what sort of tension do you notice in just your abs right now? Or tuning into these things that sometimes we can lose track of because they are so habitual.
Mm-hmm.
Again, starts opening up that opportunity to say, well, my mind is racing. I have all of these thoughts that are here. Or I feel so sluggish. I feel so down. I feel so sad. Like, whatever the condition is, there's going to be a parallel in physical reality as well as in emotional. So I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but the more we can highlight those parallels, the more we're opening up doors where it's not just, oh, well, have you tried to feel better? Or have you tried to stop thinking that way? Or have you just tried to go for a walk? Or have you just tried to exercise? But when we bring in both yeah, what's that anxiety trying to tell you?
Mm-hmm.
And how's your body trying to navigate this? Once we have both of those pieces, it makes it so much easier to move forward with something that's more likely to get to sort of the natural conclusion of whatever the situation or the impulse is.
Yeah. Yeah, an example of that too, I can say in myself, this is an example of a broader problem, but going back to your fever example, when I
Yeah.
was working in the hospital as a nurse, I would see fevers as something that needed fixing. So spike of fever for, me or my husband, my family, let me give you Tylenol. Let's get that fever down. And as I learned more and understood more about what's going on inside my body, that response is there, A, to tell me something, and B, it's not there to hurt me. It's there to help me. Um, Now, when I get a fever or someone in my family gets a fever, it's like, yes, okay, you're doing it. We can get through this. We know what it's going to be like. It's going to suck. And then your body has the power to rebalance itself. And this is one of the ways that it's helping to swing the pendulum back to help find that balance again.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it okay if we even pause on that statement of just, it's not here to hurt you,
Hmm.
it's here to help you?
Yeah.
Because that's something that so few people have the luxury of really slowing down and seeing. Because when we're in pain, when we're feeling anxious, when we're having a panic attack, when we have a migraine, the last thing that jumps to mind is, oh, yeah, this is really helpful.
Right.
Like, it may be true, but it can still feel so intense and so uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And when we're in it 100%, it's so tough to take that step back and say, okay, I know my body and my mind are working to try and help in this situation.
Hmm.
But then we go back to that question that I mentioned earlier of like, what does it mean to actually help someone be well or to be healthy? It's recognizing where it is that then, I don't have to fight against these things that are already trying to help me be healthy.
Hmm.
How can I amplify those? How can I help those along? How can I get out of the way so that those can do what they need to?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a great way to say that. So I remember last time we talked, you were telling me about some of the therapeutic modalities that you use in your practice, and a lot of these, in my realm, are were unfamiliar and new to me and sounded really exciting. Can you, like, what does a typical session look like for you, and can you tell us a little bit about these modalities that you use to help collaborate with different areas?
Yeah, totally. And I'll actually start with the second question of telling a bit about the modalities, because
Mhm.
I already mentioned internal family systems, and
Mhm.
that's purely there to help to get to know whatever your internal family is. So there's going to be caretakers, there's going to be peacekeepers, there's going to be what IFS refers to as firefighters or managers, where they've got jobs to do, they're trying to do them. And so in a typical IFS session, it is the same slowing down. Like even the way that you and I have been talking here and sort of reflecting things back. Granted, I would probably be talking a bit less, but that it's the same process of slowing down, seeing what's here, seeing what's happening, what we're noticing, and then really trying to build a connection with whatever that part is. So this morning, I had my own therapy and I was working with my therapist about my pacing. Anytime I'm nervous, I'll just pace through my kitchen. And so we slowed it down and we were able to see what is that part that keeps track of things by pacing trying to do.
Mhm.
And so when I'm sitting down with the client, sometimes there's two parts that we're working with, sometimes one, sometimes 15. But being able to just see who's in the room in terms of even the competing priorities that are there or the competing desires that are there, slowing that down, that's the bulk of an IFS session.
Mhm.
And the farther you get into it, there are ways of also dealing with much deeper, much heavier things like trauma, like depression, like even like the study that put IFS on the map in terms of evidence-based treatment was actually on rheumatoid arthritis, where when there's physical pain, our body is going to have a response to that. And there's going to be a part that's responsible for managing pain, sometimes in a specific area, sometimes in general. That the more we get to know that, the easier we can make the job for our system in general.
Mhm.
The other modality that I tend to use most often is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR.
Mhm.
Um, Recently, it's come into the mainstream a little bit more because Prince Harry has actually been talking about it in terms of it's the modality of therapy that he found most helpful in his journey and in his grieving process. But excuse me, EMDR is a bit more technical. It feels a bit strange because there's less talking than you would expect in a normal therapy session.
Hmm.
Where for EMDR, the they understand problems as sort of misfiled or miscategorized information. Where if we've made sense of something, we're then, oh, we see this particular thing as a threat, or this particular thing as something that needs a response, then that label of danger gets stuck. And particularly in the cases of trauma, which is what EMDR was designed or initially used for, then being able to go back into those experiences with sort of a clearer mind without having your whole nervous system saying danger, 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 then can help recategorize and sort of file information into the places where it makes the most sense, where it's supposed to be, and that we can have sort of a non-activated response, but sort of a freely chosen response.
Mhm.
So for an EMDR session, they use something called bilateral stimulation, which is basically just stimulating both sides of the body back and forth. And for some people, that can be tapping back and forth like this. For other clients, it'll be eye movements where they're just looking back and forth across the screen. Sometimes there's other things, but what they've been finding is that being able to do that creates sort of a relaxing rhythm, a predictable situation. It takes up enough working memory that then when we revisit a difficult memory, we're able to access it in a much more emotionally sort of secure or emotionally safe place. And we can bring whatever was sort of frozen in that loop forward to all of the information that we have now.
Mhm.
So EMDR can be a bit more involved. It can be a bit more activating just because we're going back to the difficult things and we're doing it with a lot of support and a lot of structure and a lot of resources. But we're sort of diving in to do a rescue mission for the younger you who might still be stuck in something that they learned or that they're re-experiencing from the past.
Do you ever use meditation in your practices to try to get to those places too?
Yeah. So I tend to use meditation more between sessions
Mhm.
where there are so many excellent resources for meditations that I'll connect clients with. And being able to create that sense of resource, being resourced, and being able to slow down enough and get access to these things that are really vulnerable. Meditation is a phenomenal way of doing it. And
Mhm.
so some of the things that we do sort of naturally, or that I tend to do in a session, naturally will feel meditative. Other times it'll be more of an explicit guided meditation.
Mhm.
Um, or client will bring in one that they particularly resonate with and we'll do it together in session and then sort of see what roads open up from there.
Hmm. So these are things that are integrative, I would call it. Are you encountering any resistance or bias from either your colleagues or resistance from your clients when you're introducing these type of integrative modalities?
So the only resistance that I've encountered is the kind of resistance that comes with unfamiliarity,
Mm.
where either they haven't heard of the modalities or they haven't had the opportunity to sort of integrate some of these things. Um, and being able just to have a conversation about like, oh, well, here are some resources, or please feel free to ask me questions because I don't want, again, going back to these different parts, like I don't want intellectual parts that have legitimate questions to be sort of picketing or on strike against trying something different.
Hmm.
And so before I jump into anything with a client or in recommending something for a different provider, if we're doing a consultation or collaborating on a case together, is just what questions do you have? Like, let's talk this through so that we know we're on the same page.
Hmm.
And from there, being able to build a road, again, building a road forward where we have equal resources. We're able to know, yeah, it's really complicated. We're not going to have all the answers, but this is what we've got for now. Can we try this first step and see how that feels, and then see what questions come up from there?
Mm-hmm. So just maintaining open communication, kind
Yeah.
of a foundation, huh?
Yeah. And it's remarkable how far you can get when there is open communication on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, something that is not very well practiced in our culture.
Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So going back to the idea of creating harmony between different, either within different parts of yourself and within your environmental sphere, can you give us some like practical ways that people can start fostering this internal alignment in their daily lives?
Yeah. 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 So, like I said, slowing down is the theme
Mm-hmm.
where eh, most often people will have a specific marker that's most available or most frequent in terms of when something feels good or when something feels bad.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to slow down, even if it's taking 30 seconds, and just say, what does feel good about this? Where am I feeling good? Is that an emotional thing or a physical thing? Or likewise with bad, like, what feels bad about this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this more of a tension kind of bad or a heaviness kind of bad? And just sort of rounding out that experience a little bit more can actually do so much for our systems.
Mm-hmm.
Because earlier when we were talking about fight and flight and that the vagus nerve, so much of that is regulated, or so much of the processes that go into that are called neuroception, which is basically our body's ability to say what's going on inside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the sixth sense is like what's happening inside. And when we're rushing through things or when we're distracted or our mind is in so many places, that neuroceptive process is having to keep track of so many different things. Like
Mm-hmm.
imagine your internet browser with 37 different tabs versus two tabs.
Yeah.
It's going to slow everything down when you have all the tabs open. So being able to take the time to just say, does this feel good or does this feel bad? And why? Means that then we're going to be a little bit more tuned in next time to be able to say, oh, I know this. Maybe I could try something a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And on both sides, if we find something we like and we can do that more, great, more harmony.
Mm-hmm.
If we find something bad and we get to know that a bit more, then we're going to be able to make a choice that leads us closer to harmony, even if it's not a one-step process.
Mm-hmm. Again, a lot of parallels there with what I'm working with my clients, just with the context, most usually with food. So creating the most supportive diet for each person is an individualized endeavor. I can't tell you what the most supportive diet is going to be. There's frameworks, of course, but it really relies on your own antenna for your own body. And that's something that gets pushed to the side a lot. So a lot of the work that we do together is just in fine tuning the dial of the inputs and noticing the outputs that are coming out of it. And that takes practice. You can't just, have one meal and then say, oh, that was good, that was bad, or whatever else in between. Is that it really does take some practice and some time of noticing. And a lot of times it takes clearing out the junk first so that you can even see what's there. So clearing out the practices that you know are not beneficial to you. Um, and then you're able to see underneath what feels good and what is not so supportive.
Yeah. Yeah. And even not to try and put you on the spot, but I'm curious with that process as you encounter clearing things out, like I know my clients run into so many shoulds of you should do this, you should feel this way, you should think about it like this. When coming across that, okay, tuning in the that antenna, how do you usually navigate those shoulds with clients?
That's a great question because the internet and our lives are filled with shoulds. Some of them are good and real, and a lot of them are probably not right for you. So it's separating the signal from the noise. Um, a lot of it starts with eating a whole foods diet, because a lot of the shoulds is just in that. So we know we should decrease inflammation. That's one that's true, but that means something different for everyone. That's going to be, the foods that you eat. Your mental health has a profound impact on your inflammation, your movement, your life, whatever environmental toxins are around you or getting into your system. Those are all contributors. So it takes time to sift through all of these things, and you shouldn't there we go, shouldn't. You shouldn't be doing this all at once, because then you're going to overload your system and not understand what's making a difference and what isn't. So a lot of the ways that we sift through this is just small incremental changes. Every week when we meet, or every 2 weeks when we meet, we're making one or two changes and then seeing how your body reacts, and then keeping going down the road. You don't have to jump 50 rungs on the ladder in one shot. It's one at a time, and just being okay with slowing down the process, because whatever you're dealing with right now took you a long time to get there. It took a long time for these processes to get to where they are today. And it's going to take some time to reverse out of that too, or to change it into something that's more beneficial and more harmonious with what you want it to be.
Yeah. And I really, really loved how you said that. It is going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't often think about, hey, I've been building this habit for such a long period of time. And whether that's food, whether that's a habit of responding to someone, or a habit of moving or not moving, like, it, sure, we can put out all these shoulds of, I should be able to turn this habit over overnight. But when it gets into that muscle memory, how our body's used to even just like digesting,
Yeah.
or our our body is used to processing emotions, that it is such a slower process than we would like. But when we honor that slowness, then it works so much better in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel way better after just talking to you for these 45 minutes. This is great. I'm calm. I've slowed everything down. I've switched into
Yeah.
parasympathetic. Well, maybe not yet, but soon.
But yeah, and even that is just, how often do we get the chance to just breathe, slow down, talk about something that we love, something that
Mm-hmm.
we're passionate about in a way that feels connected and fulfilling. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm glad you're feeling that slow in, because I'm definitely feeling that. Just super grateful that,
Yeah.
yeah, we've had the chance to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, I know we could keep going, but I want to finish up with one more question that I'm really curious about. Looking back on where you are now to where you started in the field, are there any like really surprising things that you've learned that you'd like to share?
Oh, so many.
Yeah. How many rabbit holes do we have time for?
Right, right. Um, I think the thing that's most surprised me is actually something that you mentioned earlier, is that how good our body and our minds are at streamlining things, where we're literally built to find shortcuts to things and to reduce the load, and that really being able to work with that. Because again, in grad school, we're drinking from the fire hose in terms of information. There are so many things that are presented as sort of more of an equation. You see this and this, here's the response, and that balances things out. But that when we actually have the chance to, or when I've had the chance to dive in and be like, oh, but what are the shortcuts that we're assuming are in place? Then that's where we get into all of these things where, oh, maybe someone didn't have an expected response to a treatment. Well, it's because we were assuming a shortcut that they didn't have.
Mhm.
And so just like, I've always loved puzzles, I've always loved mazes. Really being able to bring that in, of like, we get to explore so much. And when we're rushing through, or when we're sort of going at it just like by the book, we end up missing so many of these things that can be so useful. And those are also the moments where I end up feeling the most profound change in a client, or they get to find something out about themselves that they really treasure, that they haven't either had access to lately or that they didn't know was there. And so, with all of the different layers of shortcuts, of strategies, of things that we're supposed to do, just like really being able to say, okay, we can streamline this into you being you.
Mm-hmm.
We can streamline this into us being human.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sometimes the best thing that we can do. And one of the coolest things that we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to emphasize too that this is a get to. If we allow it to be and we take the time, then we get to dig into this and discover those treasures that you didn't know were there or and that wouldn't otherwise present themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So often people ask me, how do I do it? How do you deal with people who are so intense, or whatever that picture is with all of these stereotypes and stigmas around mental illness? People assume it must weigh on me. And every time my response is, I just get to meet so many cool people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that I get to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much for being here. Before we sign off, can you share with our listeners a little bit about how they can connect with you and learn what you're up to and more about your practice?
Yeah, totally. So I don't have too much of a social media presence at the moment, but the best way to track me down is just my practice's website. So if you search Center for Deliberate Psychotherapy, it should pop up, and the URL is deliberatepsych.com. And there are ways to get a hold of me through there. And it's usually the best way to try and get a hold of me. But yeah, please feel free to reach out. I love nerding out about this. So even if it's not a we're going to work together thing, but just a if you have questions, I am more than happy to hear from you. And yeah, Kara, thank you for making this space again and for nerding out with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Any chance to sit and talk about the things we love, like you say, I'm here for it. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope today's conversation with Dr. Alan Wood had inspired you to take control of your own health journey. Remember, whether you're looking to rewrite your health script or add unscripted chapters to your wellness journey, we're here to guide you. If this conversation sparked any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear it. So drop a comment below or find us on social media at Wellness Unscripted. Don't forget to subscribe for more health tips and inspiration. And if you'd like to learn more about me and working with me in my clinic, visit unscriptedclinic.com or follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Unscripted Clinic. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Always seek the guidance of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health or a medical condition. The hosts and guests are not responsible for any adverse effects from the use of this information.